So whenever you're looking at the EIB, you have a couple of things in mind. So just a recap and a refresher to those areas that are critical when setting up an EIB. So whenever you are setting up an EIB, populating it is easy. Like it might take 10 to 15 minutes job just to load the data into the EIB. But the research or the data analytics that you need to do before you start populating the EIB is a critical part. So whenever you get a requirement to run an EIB that is going to serve a particular purpose, like in our case, we were creating positions for a particular supervisory organization. So questions to ask when creating a position: which supervisory organization it's going to? What is going to be the reason? Is a position ID going to be system generated, or do we need to do it ourselves? Then next part is location, the job profiles that's going to include, the job family is going to include, the availability date, earliest hire date, and then of course worker type and position time type. So in this case, it's part of HR. Here's a job profile that I'm hiring for. Here's the location. Here's the availability date of the job profile, that when the position as to when it will be available to be created, and what is going to be the earliest hire date. Getting that profile created in the right superorg is very, very critical. So you have to ask these questions, or you should know these questions as to before you start populating the EIB. Now, in some of the EIBs, of course, this will come with experience and with time. You have these options for pull-down menu. Now, in every section, you will see, almost every section, you will see a WID and then maybe a list of values. Now, when I'm creating this position, the general event subcategory ID has a couple of options here, like undo move category, benefit event subcategory, and additional job category, change job subcategory, leave of absence type ID. So generally, we use a general event subcategory most of the times, but if you need to have a specific type of ID for your position request reason, you have this option for the pull-down menu. Not many of them would have it. Some of them might not even have it at all, especially the text ones, they would not be there. And for example, maybe you have more than one values in a particular object. So if I want to do that, if I go back to my tenant, so difficult reference ID value. Okay, not for this one, but say time type or location. So it's San Francisco. I open this business object, so I'll get the details. So I can go from here, look at my IDs. And here, the location ID is San Francisco, but then there's something called Workday ID. Now, in addition to the reference ID, there's another unique ID within the system. Now, this is called Workday ID, or in other words, WID as well. So say if I select the WID option from the list, I can put this value over here. Sometimes you may need to use this. It's not many times that you would need that. But you can use a Workday ID. There would be very few scenarios where, for example, multiple objects has the same value, the same reference ID, but they're in different multiple objects. So if you need to really, specify or select the WID level accuracy, then you can use the WID as well. Okay. Another point to note is whenever you're looking for reference IDs, always try and make sure that your organization reference ID, for example, is matching here. The reference ID type right here, which is in the second column, should and must match the column C4 when you're looking for organization reference ID. The type has to match. Otherwise, the object would be different. So this is a business object organization, and the reference ID type under organization for each individual business object instance has to be an organization reference ID, and then it would have its own value. Like HRIS, reference ID value is matrix underscore HRIS. Another point to note is when you go to the additional tabs within your EAB, if you have more than one tabs, like we have in this case, and say, for example, these were different job titles, different supervisory organizations. So whatever key you're using in create position, you will have to use the same key here for that particular record. So for example, this might be not HR services, but HR operations, the number 20. So whenever I'm entering the values for HR operations, I have to make sure it's corresponding to the same spreadsheet key in the edit organization as well. Also, you can put any value here that you like in spreadsheet key, but whenever you get an error, you will get an error based on these keys. But if the sequencing is out, say you start this from 2 and 3, or say it is 1 and 2, but say you skip a number here, so whenever you get an error, you will get an error of this particular row. It will call out in the error as a line number 11, not 12, what the spreadsheet key you have put in, but it'll go in sequence of numerical order as per the number of rows, not what you have defined here in the spreadsheet key. So if you're skipping numbers here, your errors would show on this would be 19 right here on row number 24. It will not show the error corresponding to your spreadsheet key number, but it'll go in the sequence of the rows. All right. Okay, so let's start with our new chapter, core connector workers. And before we jump onto it, I would strongly recommend you all to please do practice your inbound and outbound EIB because it will come in handy when you are running the HR operations. Um, it would be a good thing to have some practice on it. And if you have any questions, let me know, and I would be more than happy to help out. Okay, so the chapter that we are starting off today is core connector workers. So our agenda that we are going to cover in this chapter is integration architecture overview, workday connectors, integration building blocks, what is a core connector, launching an integration system, change detection, transaction log, integration sequence generator. So integration architecture. Again, if you recall, I shared a slide where I showed the Workday architecture, where the OMS engine is, where's the storage, the web browser access, and the data access. So inbound EIB is also data access. Integrations is also data access. So common outbound design patterns, it's a delivered solution. It's called Workday Connector. Now, many of the integrations are designed and built by Workday and also maintained by Workday. And by maintain, I mean the structure of the or the template of that integration. Workday puts in a lot of effort in creating these templates ready for use in a template format for us as users or as integration experts. And Workday goes out and engages with clients, with companies that would be utilizing this connector for many of their purposes. So it constantly evolves and updates the connector and ensures that whatever options are required in that connector to a given organization, not just one, but many out there, and ensures and maintains that all those requirements are fulfilled within your connector, the standard connector that Workday delivers as part of the solution of Workday. Workday sees this as a focus area as well and will continue to build these integration templates as part of their delivered solution. So when we try to run the connector, we have to configure the integration using even the delivered solution. So we can set up the services, the attributes, the maps, and then the transaction logs. Workday defines the rules of the and the output, and Workday builds the integration using the SOAP API. And then delivery service delivers the output to endpoint. So let's look at Workday connectors. So Workday connectors are pre-built integration templates that extends Workday's functionality to external systems for human capital management, payroll interface, financial management, and spend management. All integrations are hosted and maintained by Workday. Rapid deployment while ensuring external systems only see the data that you want to expose. So you have control and command over what the external system can see. So Workday provides pre-built connectors for various target systems. End-to-end connectors support a specific named third-party application or service. When a connector is displayed, the specific business functions between the two systems are configured with no additional coding required. Connectors are pre-built integrations that address a majority of the integration efforts required to connect to a third-party endpoints. So all connectors does require some level of tenant configurations and testing, because the template is generalized for majority of the population out there, and it would have almost all the values that you may need to set up that connector with your third-party system. But then you have to pick and choose and populate the value for your connector, for your tenant with your vendor. So in many cases, like in most of the cases, not many, in most of the cases, like for example, if you have the Workday tenant and you're using, say, ADP as a company to process your payroll, then ADP would give you a documentation set for integrations that, okay, in your connector, these are the values we would expect you to put in so that we can see it in our system when you launch the connector. For example, between Workday and ADP, you may have a contract ID or a company ID that would identify to ADP that this is your tenant. Based on the state that you are in, for example, United States, if you're in California, you may have different taxation requirement. For New York, you may have different taxation requirement. If you're in the Texas area, you may have a different taxation requirement, or Missouri or Mississippi or Louisiana or Cleveland, wherever you are. So the selection of states where you're operating would be an option, because we were talking about workers. So you may have more than one state that you may select in your integration mapping, because your workers' geographic location is all over the country. What are the worker details that we want to send to the payroll partner? Do they need their salary? Do they need the compensation details? Do they need the benefit details? Do they need the hire date, the job level, job group, job management, how long they have been with the company? Do they need a social security number? Do they need the tax ID number or the TIN number? So this configuration set is discussed and managed between us as Workday Integration Manager and also our vendor, where we mutually decide which values would go, what are those values, and how the connector is going to be set up. Though the connector template is provided and maintained by Workday, but then it's absolutely configurable to the nth level for the options that would like to send in that integration connector. So each customer may have specific mapping requirements and a different endpoint configuration. The difference in customer configuration can be accommodated with Workday's integration templates and mapping capabilities. So Workday connectors are currently available for, by default, off-the-shelf benefits, HCM, Workday payroll, third-party payroll, financials, spend management, student. So the example I gave was for the third-party payroll, which is ADP. If you're not going to use the Workday payroll module or the solution itself, you can engage with a third party to manage your payroll as well. And Workday does provide a built-in connector for that. So Workday connectors are integrations. Connector integrations are a configurable delivered solution. By delivered solution, what we mean that it is delivered by Workday as a included product within the tenant. This design pattern is useful when you require change detection. However, a Workday connector can also be used to produce a full file output. Now, you may ask, what is a full file output? A full file output is the population for your entire organization. And the other type of output would be changes or incremental changes. So, for example, for the first time, you may send an entire full file to your ADP provider where you are sending all the information about all the employees, and that becomes your base database. And incrementally, say if your payroll is running every 2 weeks, so every 2 weeks, what you're sending is changes to the existing full file. So it depends on the need of your vendor, between yourself, between Workday and the vendor. If it's going to be a full file or it's going to be an incremental file, that is something that can be discussed and designed within your connector. The transaction log can be leveraged to filter down relevant results. So you do get a transaction log after every uh, connector is or integration is fired and completed. It is reasonably advised that only a restricted number of field overrides are required to avoid overrides that use calculated field prompts. So if you are using your connector and there are some special cases which is not available in the connector and that is required by your organization, you can create field overrides and calculated field prompts for your integration as well. So delivery service supports the file delivery requirements. So when your connector is fired, it would populate the data from your Workday tenant. Then that file has to be delivered to someone. So that is called the delivery support or delivery service. And of course, while delivering the document or the file, it can be encrypted. It can be sent via a secure channel using the connector. You can use the SSH encryption using the combination of private key and public key, or it can be sent to SFTP or GData or whatever it may be required as to where you need to deliver the documentation, which is the output of your connector integration. So core connector lets you specify which data elements to include in integration output files. When launched, the integration collects a snapshot of all data and creates an output file in XML format based on your specification. So what are the building blocks for integrations? An integration template is a collection of integration services that enable communication between Workday and external system. Workday provides integration templates in categories such as benefits, financials, HCM, payroll, payroll interface, procurement, recruiting, security, and settlement. So many of the delivered templates contain default values for attributes as well as prompt values for attributes and maps to define the integration further. So integration service contains a set of attributes and maps related to specific integration function. Integration services uses XSLT, which is the short for Extensible Style Sheet Language Transformation, to convert Workday XML into a format that an Excel system can read. So if you have your XML data and you would like to transform that data into a different format or make changes to your data and perform iterations to the data as well, or additions to the data from what is extracted from Workday, and then send it to the client. So XSLT would define that change set as to what is going to be changed in the data that is sourced from Workday, how it's going to be transformed using the XSLT, and then what format it needs to go out to the third-party vendor or provider that you're working with. Integration services focus on functional areas such as account provisioning and health insurance, as well as integration behaviors such as document retention, field overrides, and file delivery. So integration attributes are an integration component that specifies a tenanted value of the data element in Workday. Example, the core connector worker template provides attributes to define address types, benefit plan names, pay rate types, country code, and in addition, there are general attributes to control behaviors such as including prior values. This may need to be changed occasionally to modify the attributes for an integration, navigate to the related action, integration system, configure integration attributes on the integration system. So I do understand that this is a pretty dry subject, and not everybody would be interested in the integration building blocks and all the information that I'm sharing, but it is important. So before I go more into the details, let me show you what an integration looks like when we are working in a tenant. So I'm going to select the core connector worker. And here you can see that there are a couple of integrations, or 371 items in this core connector for worker. And say, let's open this one. All right. So this is our core connector worker integration template. We can see here, it says right here, the template type. What is the name of our integration within our system? Here we can see all the services that are included in this integration template, like core connector, worker core ESP service, date launch parameters, integration maps, worker integration configuration, integration maps foundation, integration map job, define eligibility, integration map talent, personal data section fields, worker status data section fields, worker position data section fields, worker compensation data section fields. An initial service to invoke is the ESP service. Then these are all optional, like the last four ones: personal data, worker status data, and whether these services are enabled for your connector or not, you can either enable them or disable them, which is available in the core connectors. Next is the integration attributes, which are configurable by us for our particular integration requirement. Here you can see the attribute provider is core connector worker integration configuration. So what is going to be the name of our output file? And here you can see the value is output XML. Are there any tags that are required with the document? So currently there are no tags in the attribute value. What is the version for our integration for worker. Then it says required for launch and version 34 or 0. Again, the output format is XML. Name type is legal preferred types of names that we're going to send in an integration. What is it going to be the country ISO code? What is the address type? What is the usage type? The phone number, we want to send the work phone number. Then include private phone numbers, we're saying no. Include non-primary phone numbers, we're saying no. Email type, we want to share the work email address. And so on. And the list goes on. And all these attributes are designed by Workday. The description is available and they are managed by the attribute values. And how do we configure this? If I go to integration system, configure integration attributes. So if I go to my configure integration attributes in this connector, I would have a value for every single attribute type. So for example, I see that there is no output document tags, and if I want to add it, I can click here, select the type, say Skillsoft, and say I need to do this for sandbox. Restricted to environment is what kind of environment I want to have this value to show. So if I select production, so it will show on my, or it will run on my production tenant, and so on. Here I can see all the version values. Then output format here is XML. Then name type, we are saying that legal preferred name, the ISO code, the address type. In some of the areas, you will see that there is no option to change that. But if I want to change it, I need to override the default values. So include private address, say, if I want to do it, I can select yes or no. The checkmark would mean yes. Phone type, email address, job classification, and all the attributes that are available that are configurable are listed here. So I'll come to the maps and security a bit later in the slide deck. So we'll jump back to it again. So field attributes enables you to configure the contents of an integration output file field by field. Select which field to include in the integration, specify whether the fields are required, and specify a maximum field length. Workday searches for changes to the selected fields, validates required fields are in the output file, truncates a value that exceed the maximum length, and reports any error in the audit file. So whenever your integration is fired and it's executed, you will have an audit file available for that particular integration run. So to modify field attributes for integration as a related action on the integration system, select integration system, configure integration field attributes that we just did a few minutes ago. So before building an integration with the core connector worker template, familiarize yourself with each data section to understand which fields are available for output, how the configuration option affect integration behavior. So for more information on data sections, navigate to the following documentation section, reference core connector worker integration data section. This is referring to the Workday community. So how does one do the integration field attributes? Like we just did, configure integration field attributes, name data. You can select the first name, middle name, or last name. Configure integration field attributes. Give me one moment. So with this, in the integration field attributes, we can define each and every section of our integration as to how we can make changes or what changes do we want to make. For example, the first section is in this integration, the worker personal data section field documents. If I go here, I can either select include all fields in output, or what do I need to include in the output when we're talking about worker personal data. So we are sending first name, middle name, last name. So they are selected. So depending between your discussion between yourself and your vendor, your integration specification document will outline all these requirements as to what you need to send within the integration, what is acceptable to your partner. So here, there's no maximum length defined, so it means it's zero. So whatever the name length may be, it will be sent through. So either included in output or it's a required field. So if you mark it as required, and if that field is not available within your tenant, it will give an error for that particular record. Like in some countries, we have names in local script or Western names are in the system. So if you want to include all those, you can include an output file, like the gender, birthday, country of birth, region of birth, marital status, citizenship status, disability, ethnicity, address data. So you can configure each and every field for personal data, what to include in your integration connector. Next is the worker status data. And if I want to include all fields in output, I can do that. Or if I want to be selective, like staffing event, most recent staffing transaction for the worker, then the employee status, the current employment status of the worker, whether active or terminated or on leaves. Active equals yes means that only send the data for active employee, not the terminated employee. If I want to include the active status date, I can do that. If I want to include the hire date, I can select that. In original hire dates, so for example, if an employee is a rehire within the organization, like a particular worker, say, used to work 3 years ago, and then he left the company, and now that worker has again joined the company. So that would be the original hire date would be the first time that person was hired, and the hire date would be the most recent hire date. If I want to include the hire reason, first day of work, retirement details, benefit service dates, whether the employee is terminated or not, or he's going to be terminated during this month. Maybe the employee is active in this payroll cycle, but maybe the termination has been entered in the system for, say, after 5 days. So we can also include the terminated status and the termination date as well. If you need to include the pay through date and all the termination related details, we can add that here. If that employee was, say, involuntarily terminated, then that person may not be eligible for hire anymore. And say all the details about worker status. Then comes the section for position details. where you have operations, position ID, effective date, title, business title, worker type, and everything related to the position, where the worker details, the compensation code, job family, job profile, supervisory organization, supervisor name, and then comes a section for compensation details. Again, position ID, total annual base pay, what is the base pay currency, frequency, compensation change reason, effective date. Integration map. An integration map is an integration component that specifies how values in Workday map to values in an external system. Example, the core connected worker template provides integration maps for a variety of fields such as marital status, gender, hire reason, and worker type. So let's have a look at that. So for example, we don't have any integration maps entered in the system. But for example, in title, we call our title within our tenant that title is not a good example. Say, for male members, gender, in our tenant, we call it male. But say, in their system, in my partner system, they are expecting the gender value not as not declared female or male, but say they are expecting ND, F, and M. So whenever I'm sending the integration and I'm sending the gender details of that particular worker, they're not expecting that I send not declared or send the complete female or complete male characters as my integration identifier or integration data. So what they're expecting is that, if it's not declared, it should come as ND. If it's a female, it should come as F. If it's a male, it should come as M for employee gender type. So when I need to make changes like these, that is where the integration maps comes in. For example, marital status. Say I select US and then I have divorced and say for married, they are expecting MAR and say DIV. So my field name that is going to be included in the integration is going to be divorced United States of America or married USA. And maybe what they need is a married underscore US. So they will define that whenever we are sending the marital status for a worker, they would expect the header to be, say, for married in the country United States, send us MAR_US. Or if it's a divorce, send us divorce_US for United States. So when we need to match or change the map values for our integration, we can use this integration maps to manage these entries for our integration connector. And then you have it for each and every object that you are going to be sending within your integration. Here we had the integration maps for worker, then we have the integration maps for foundation, then integration maps for job, integration maps for talent, and so on. So all these values are configurable within your tenant or your connector. So transaction logs provide a record of business process and events in Workday. Integration can subscribe to a specific transaction log event to capture the changes to employee data that are relevant to an external system. Note, some connectors include job posting, location, and competency does not include a transaction log service, as the underlying Workday web services get location do not include in it. So what is a transaction log? Let's have a look at it. Say, for example, if this integration ran, no, it didn't. So this integration fired on 9/7/2021, the last time it ran. This was an integration system. It was run by Logan McNeil. And let's look at the integration event. And the status is complete. So these were the values of the event as of entry moment, effective date, last successful as of entry moment. So basically it ran for a week. So it's a weekly schedule. Last successful effective date, workers, result by org, or is it a full file or not? So these are the parameters for the integration. And if I look at the output files, I'll have the diagnostic audit, output, and the worker XSD. So for example, if I click on output XML, so I should be able to see in the XML format of the data that was sent via the integration to the third party. So here on the top, you will see the XML configuration or the schema. Then the first header comes in. What's the header version? Entry time, current entry time, prior effective date. So all the values that we defined in the parameters are listed here. Full file is true. Document retention policy is 30 days, and worker count in this file is 1. Then the next header starts for worker, just mentioned right here. Then the summary of the worker, the employee ID, the name, then the end of summary, then eligibility is true, then the personal details. What was the first name was Logan, last name was McNeil, then the gender data, then the marital status, then the employee status, then the active is true, hire date was this, terminated is false, then status, effective date 01/06/2016, she was Vice President Human Resources, worker type was regular, then compensation ID, it's sending the position ID details here. And this is how a typical output would look like in your integration if it's being sent by as an XML format. Now, if I open the workers XSD, So this is my XSD, or I can call it an XSLT as well, which defines how my data is being transmitted and what is the transformation that is required to run my integration. If I want to look at my audit file as to what has changed, so this audit file will give you a pretty decent interface in your browser about each worker. What is the summary? What is the message audit file? And because we just have one worker here, so it won't be too much. And say if I want to see retrieve log files, I can click here, say press OK. Then here, I can see the log files now available to us. And the log file will have the entire detail of the integration, what happened, how did it work, what was the input, what was the output. So if I click on View Consolidated Report and Logs, I can have another view of the integration, root, save, generate integration, and all the events that happened. And each and every event or step that was executed, you'll have detailed values for each and every step that happened during that integration. Right. So delivered custom solution, Workday connectors with document transformation. Guys, I think let's take a break here before we jump on uh, the document transformation. Let's try to absorb what we have discussed so far as to how integration connectors, the map, the integration attributes, how that works. I would like you all to go back and practice in your tenant. Go to the view integration system all, uh, have a look at it, study it, and then we can continue from here in our next session. Because if I start going in the document transformation, it's a different area of the integration, but again, it's quite detailed.